Good evening. This is Scotland in 7. I'm Effie Samara reading the news tonight. It's usually Gordon Ross, but it will be me tonight. So we are starting as usual with the coronavirus update. Sorry, I forgot to mention our guest. I'm joined by a wonderful guest, Andrew Wilson from All Under One Banner. How are you, Andrew?
Effie, good evening. It's great to be here and to see you this evening. I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
Fabulous. Right, so absolutely straight onto the coronavirus statistics. As of 2 p.m. today, a total of 974,646 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres. Of these, 913,115 were confirmed negative, 61,531 were positive. There were 1,228 new confirmed cases of COVID-19. There are 37 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive today. This will be an underestimate of the number of cases. Not everyone with the virus will display symptoms, and not all of those with symptoms will be tested. Of the people who have tested positive, 1,152 were in hospital last night, 86 of whom were in intensive care. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus COVID-19 infection now sadly stands at 2,791. This number only includes those who died in hospital having received a positive test for the virus. The latest UK daily figures available show 45,955 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 280 since yesterday. This number refers to death in all settings, not just in hospitals. Obviously, as always, we do urge you, if you do display symptoms, to get yourself tested. The infection level in Scotland, though still very high, has now fallen for the 8th day since the peak on the 21st of October. The level of 1,128 cases in the last 24 hours now lower by 35% than the peak figure of 1,739 on the 21st of October. In Lanarkshire, the region with the highest infection level, the number of cases has fallen for the 8th day since the imposition of stricter measures there 5 to 6 weeks ago. The level in Lanarkshire is now only 1/4 of that in most parts of the north of England. Level quarantine changes, as we know, there have been a couple of changes here. Travellers from Cyprus and Lithuania must quarantine on arrival in Scotland for 14 days from 4 a.m. on Sunday, the 1st of November. This is due to a significant rise in cases of coronavirus COVID-19 infection, as well as an increase in the numbers of cases testing positive, as well as the associated risk of importation into Scotland. Now, if you'd like to join the conversation here, please do so on Twitter by following us broadcast. Sorry, this is me just being a little bit nervous and using the hashtag Scotland@7. I would love to hear from you. So on to a first story now. 3 dead as a woman is beheaded in an attack in the French capital. A knife-wielding attacker that is in Nice, that's my mistake. A knife-wielding attacker reported to have been shouting Allahu Akbar, beheaded a woman and killed 2 other people at a church in the French city of Nice today. President Emmanuel Macron declared that France had been subject to an Islamist terrorist attack and said he would deploy thousands more soldiers to protect key French sites, such as places of worship and schools. Speaking from the scene, he said France had been attacked over our values, for our taste of freedom, for the ability on our soil to have freedom of belief. And I say it with lots of clarity again today, we will not give any ground. Now, Andrew, obviously this is tragic news from Nice today. We know that France is obviously very tense. There are racial tensions in France, as there are all across Europe and the Western world at the moment. What do you make of this tragic incident?
Well, firstly, Effie, as you say, it's a terrible tragedy for those involved, the families of those who have unfortunately been killed. It's a wider tragedy as well, I think. It's curious. I was discussing earlier this week with a French journalist the secular nature of French public life. We were discussing Scottish politics. And in that context, it was apparent that whilst we might talk about religion in Scottish politics, it's just not possible in France, really. And so, thinking about that as I say, France being a much more secular state than Scotland is, for religious intolerance to be rearing its ugly head again, and in particular, I was struck when I heard the news this morning. Firstly, for an attack to be carried out at 9 or just after 9 o'clock in the morning, and to be carried out in a church seems really very extreme, and is a real concern. One would expect, and indeed I think there's plenty of evidence that the French state has responded very strongly again, as you say, thousands of troops. I think 14,000 was the number that I saw, and also I think it's a real pity because apart from the attack, the murder of Samuel Paty, the teacher, earlier this month, France had been relatively peaceful in terms of religious strife and violent crime associated with religion. Well, I think we'd had almost a year without an outrage of this nature taking place. So it's really very sad that obviously it's very sad indeed for those involved and those directly affected. I think also it's very sad for religious understanding and for the process of peace, and France is a peaceful political state. It has the risk of being damaging in a number of ways, and I'm sure others are very concerned.
Yes, absolutely. I'm sure this is shared all across Scotland and Europe today. I was trying to catch up with the European press, and it's literally a very, very big piece of tragic news. But I was wondering whether you did mention France obviously being a secular state, and this is also part of the French constitution. It does mention freedom of religion and the fact that the government will always, and the state will always be separate from that. But in terms of if you like, Macron's approach, do you feel that at any point he has tried to address maybe the fear or the populist turn that we've seen in the Western world over the last maybe 5 years by almost trying to echo some of these principles and not fueling the fire, but what do you make of his strong rhetoric, Andrew?
Well, Effie, I think that much of the strong rhetoric will be being deployed in order to seek to keep people calm. In a sense, a strong and very obvious response on the streets within the law will be calculated, firstly, for protection's sake, but secondly, to demonstrate to all sections of society that the French state is still in control, and that is taking extra steps to protect everybody. So I think that's an important message. I think for the populists, the notion that they might be encouraged by these events to begin to consider taking matters into their own hands. For example, I think the deployment of the French military, and I'm sure my recollection, it's been almost a year since I was last in France, but my recollection certainly of busy parts of France, Paris and Nice as well, was that there is usually a relatively visible police presence in very busy urban parts of France anyway. So ramping that up, I think, is to demonstrate two things, or to demonstrate a message in two directions. Firstly, to those who would seek to break the law and to do damage like this, that the state is deploying its resources to prevent them. But I think that message is also being sent to those who might seek to exploit this with racist or Islamist rhetoric. And we know that far-right politics in France are pretty close to the surface most of the time. So I think they are also being messaged that they should not consider taking matters into their own hand because the state will provide and will protect the citizens. So there's messages there. I think beyond that, I'm not very close to French politics, but I'm not aware of much in the way of attempts to address the issues which have perhaps given rise to the outrage this morning and previous violent attacks on people. I think I think it would have been potentially very difficult in this case. Local reporting, I think, suggests that the individual who was detained by the French authorities this morning was a relatively recent arrival in France from Italy and originally from Tunisia, I think. So it would have been difficult to deploy it would have been difficult to de-radicalize such a person if they were not in France and part of France in that sense. However, I think it does indicate that the need to continue to think constructively about de-radicalizing and about embracing all of the communities in order that those who would break the law and those who would harm others, especially in such a dramatic and violent manner, that such people are identified within their communities, whatever community that might be, wherever the extremist may be taking shelter or participating, that any community would identify such people and would seek to do the right thing, which is to bring the person to the attention of the authorities in order that they can be dealt with in advance of such a serious crime taking place. So I think in this case it would have been very difficult, but I think there is definitely a case in all European countries, in my opinion, to do more at the root of these issues to prevent rather than react.
I will pick up on that word root because my next piece of news is about roots of problems, and we're going to talk about this in just 1 second. Keir Starmer has removed the Labour whip from Jeremy Corbyn following anti-Semitism. The Equality and Human Rights Commission today published a 130-page report of its inquiry into anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. The report found that the Labour Party could have tackled anti-Semitism more effectively if the leadership had chosen to do so, and that Labour breached the Equality Act in 2 cases relating to the former London Mayor, Ken Livingstone, and a borough councillor, Pam Bromley, by committing unlawful harassment against Jewish people. We found specific examples of harassment, discrimination and political interference in our evidence, the report mentioned, but equally of concern was a lack of leadership within the Labour Party on these issues, which is hard to reconcile with its stated commitment to a zero-tolerance approach to anti-Semitism. The report continues that there was political interference in the handling of anti-Semitism complaints, which it said was part of a wider practice of the leader of the opposition's office getting involved in disciplinary cases that were deemed politically sensitive. It reviewed 70 complaint files between March 2016 and May 2019 and concluded that there were 23 instances of political interference by staff from the leader's office and others. These included clear examples of interference at various stages throughout the complaint handling process, including in decisions on whether to investigate and whether to suspend. As a result, the Equality Watchdog concluded this was indirectly discriminatory and unlawful, and it held that the Labour Party was legally responsible for it. After the publication, the damning report from the Equality Watchdog, a Labour spokesperson said the party had suspended former leader Jeremy Corbyn following a statement by Mr. Corbyn in which he said anti-Semitism in the party was overstated. Wow. Andrew, I mean, where to start? This is big news. Obviously, Jeremy Corbyn, having been leader of the Labour Party, has seen us through Brexit and all of this stuff. Now, I'm wondering what is going on here. It seems that we're not addressing anti-Semitism. We're addressing power politics within the Labour Party. Are we, or am I wrong?
No, Effie, I would agree with you completely. And we're addressing power politics both within the Labour Party and within European and Western politics as well, I think. I think in a glib sense, Jeremy Corbyn may be back in his happy place, in a sense. By that I mean he spent most of his 40 years in politics on the political fringes. I know he was an MP, but he was the he was a backbencher, and he was the poster boy for the awkward squad. He would vote against the party leadership and vote against the whip whenever the notion took him. And here he is now back again, now suspended from the Labour Party, so he's even more on the sidelines. So in a sense, he's back where he's been for most of his political career, I would argue. However, a much more serious point that you make is that the use and abuse of accusations of anti-Semitism and of the issues arising from the behaviour of the State of Israel in Palestine and elsewhere now rears its head, or not now rears its head, continues to rear its head in Labour politics in the UK. I think the involvement of the State of Israel in Conservative Party politics and Labour Party politics is a matter for concern. The Home Secretary, of course, after all, was suspended after she went on an unauthorised and private mission and met with Israeli government ministers.
Indeed,
when she was
yes,
allegedly
Priti Patel, yes.
Correct. So I think that is another manifestation of the same problem. However, I think that for an independent report of this scale and this size means that the findings in the report are very difficult to criticise. And must and have to be treated very, very seriously. Now, that then takes it to the next point, at least within the Labour Party, which is, as you say, it's a question of leadership. I think there are certainly clearly open warfare continuing within the Labour Party between the Corbynites and those who may be more centrist, or certainly who have aligned behind Keir Starmer. And I think this is another battle in that ongoing war. However, from my own perspective, the lack of leadership through the Corbyn years, which I would argue was as a result of the previous 37 years when he was on the political fringes as a member of the backbench awkward squad, and not a leader in any way at all. I think that in part has led us to this point, because his lack of ability as a leader and his unwillingness to do what leaders are required to do, which is lead, and that is reflected in the unconscionable and repetitious abstentions by the Labour Party MPs through austerity, through Brexit, and which continues to this day. And so the Labour Party appears to have become hooked in some sense on abstaining on matters of principle and matters on which they really know, or they ought to know, where they ought to stand. So I think Keir Starmer is trying to undo a little bit of that lack of leadership, and he is seeking to stamp his authority. And I think especially a Labour leader with such a strong legal background will have recognised immediately the depth and seriousness of the issues which are here. And also, if he was not satisfied that there were serious legal issues being raised, then he would have dealt with this in a different way. So I think it's clear that there may now be a degree of leadership returning to the Labour Party, only to a degree. I think there are still signs of ongoing warfare between the two main factions in the party, and to take that further, I think that means that there continues to be a significant problem in British politics, because we do not have an opposition which is able to oppose. And in the absence of that important check or balance on the behaviour of a government which has quite a large majority, British politics does not work at the moment, and that's a major problem.
Yes, you're right. And obviously, in the middle of a pandemic, this adds to our headaches, and we are. Then our next item is about the pandemic. Important news announced today: local authority protection levels have been confirmed. Council areas have been notified as to which coronavirus protection level they will have to adhere to from 6 in the morning on Monday, the 2nd of November. The assessment of what level of protection should be applied to each local authority is broadly assessed on an analysis of 5 key indicators: number of positive COVID-19 cases per 100,000 people over the last week, percentage of positive tests, forecasts for new cases in the weeks ahead, capacity of local hospitals, capacity of local intensive care facilities. These factors are assessed alongside the advice and recommendations of local public health officials, National Incident Management Team, the Scottish Government's chief clinical and policy advisors, and consideration of local circumstances such as specific COVID-19 outbreaks, travel and work patterns, and the extent to which health services are provided by neighbouring health boards. Final decisions are based on all of these factors. Alongside the table setting out the levels, a detailed analysis paper has also been published, setting out the Scottish Government's assessment and overall decision for each local authority. No local authorities are in level 0 or level 4. So we will give you now the different local authorities. Level 1 is Highland, Moray, Western Isles, Orkney and Shetland. Level 2, Aberdeenshire, Aberdeen, Fife, Scottish Borders, Dumfries and Galloway, Argyll and Bute, Perth and Kinross, and Angus. Level 3, Inverclyde, East Dunbartonshire, West Dunbartonshire, Renfrewshire, East Renfrewshire, City of Glasgow, South Ayrshire, East Ayrshire, North Ayrshire, Stirling, Falkirk, Clackmannshire, City of Edinburgh, Mid Lothian, West Lothian, East Lothian, Dundee, North Lanarkshire and South Lanarkshire. So a lot of homework for all of us, Andrew, but this is essential stuff because from what I'm seeing, I think, and what the scientists have been observing is these measures actually do work. And we've seen a timid drop in cases and the curve coming very slightly back to where we'd like it, well, nowhere near where we'd like it to be, but going in the right direction just now. So your take, please, on this. This is essential stuff and it's due to take effect very, very quickly.
Yes, Effie, I think this development in the protections against the spread of the virus is an important step, and I think it reflects in part where we now are. And by that I mean our understanding of the virus and its transmission is improving. Our public health systems have been reconfigured and have been reorganized in all sorts of ways to continue to address the virus and the threat of the virus. The various other systems which have been added or have been cranked up, I'll put it in those terms. So our test and protect system and the application that underpins that. So a number of, it is not the case that I think any government, but certainly not the Scottish government, are standing still on any of this. And so we are seeing an evolution of the approach and an evolution of the way to seek to combat the threat of the virus. Now, that almost necessarily is going to be quite complicated for the population for the period of time that these new levels and this evolved approach is bedding in. I'll explain. I'll personalise it in a sense. As you mentioned, I helped to organise with All Under One Banner. We were due to be organising a socially distant static rally, something that the regulations call an organised outdoor activity. We were meant to be organising one to take place in the city of Dundee on this coming Saturday the 31st. Now, as always with All Under One Banner, we listened very carefully to the messaging from the First Minister and from the public health authorities and from others. We work very closely with Police Scotland and others too. And so we were very clear that in strict legal terms, an outdoor organised activity in Dundee on Saturday, the 31st of October would be legal. However, we also were aware that it was likely that there was a hotspot of infections in Dundee, that there was the expectation, which has now come to pass, that this Dundee city would be placed into level 3, and that as a result, at 6 o'clock on Monday morning, as you say, an outdoor organised activity in Dundee would become illegal. So we took the view that we need to think about the way in which the protections are being introduced, and we need to think about the levels of infection and the public health priorities that are taking place. And as a result, before the First Minister made her announcement regarding the city of Dundee going into level 3, we had confirmed and had taken the decision to postpone the event that was otherwise going to take place.
So that was a wise thing to do, obviously, Andrew, and you've personalized it. I think personalizing it is what we all ought to be doing in our own setting, in our own jobs and our own duties. But I think very, very briefly, I would like to hear from you how you see the First Minister's, not on a personal level really, but there has been an address to the nation just a couple of hours ago, I understand, and she has, I don't know if you've had a chance to have a look, she's being very personable. She thanks people, and she takes again a collaborative approach, which is a little bit different to what we've been seeing from the Westminster government. And she again reiterates that private meetings, household mixing is the most, at the moment, seems to be the main driver for the virus. So hence the regional approach. Do you think that this collaborative, respectful, listening approach is helping, as opposed to taking a punitive stance towards what's happening at the moment, which affects us all in this immediate way?
I think you're right, Effie. I'm pretty sure I've said on this programme, but I've certainly said to anyone who's been asking about it, that the style and means of communication from the First Minister partially explain why her approval ratings are so vastly above those of the Prime Minister, and also that I feel, and I continue to feel very strongly, that her straightforward, direct, honest, and presented in a language which people can understand, that messaging has been successful and is very important. Now, I was also going to say that the communication of a more complex system of restrictions, and one which is likely to continue to change two things. It's likely to be in place for many months to come, but also it's likely to change from time to time. That requires very careful and very clear and very blunt communication to the population again and again and again, in order that people understand what is expected of them, in addition to them thinking about what's going on and taking responsibility, which is the point that you made. So there's a need for ever clearer and ever better communication here, because this is difficult. The restrictions vary from local authority to local authority. It's likely that that's going to become even more granular as time goes on. So the need for clear and effective communication, of which the First Minister is pretty good, it continues to be important. People need to continue to think and to act responsibly as well. That's really important, and I think we also need to continue to see the ongoing evolution and refinement and improvement of the public health response and the political response to the virus, which I think these steps reflect and are to be encouraged.
Yes, and talking about political responses, our next item is precisely about that. Now, the IMF has had something to say about the British government, and it's very interesting. It says Britain can afford to ramp up its already massive spending push to counter the effects of the coronavirus pandemic on the economy, the head of the International Monetary Fund said today, with Finance Minister Rishi Sunak facing alarm from within the Conservative Party about a record peacetime budget deficit. IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva said he should increase public investment and bolster welfare support for people who lose their jobs because of the crisis. The government should also continue to support companies and protect workers until the economic hit eases, Georgieva said at the end of a review of Britain's economy by the fund. My main message today is that continued policy support is essential to address the pandemic and to sustain and invigorate our recovery, Georgieva said. Low interest rates meant Britain could afford to borrow heavily to limit the economic and social impact of the crisis. But in the longer term, tax rises would be needed, she added. With only a few weeks left to negotiate a Brexit deal with Brussels, the IMF's managing director went on to say the EU and UK should agree a settlement of lasting damage that would make an already difficult situation worse. I mean, we've literally got 5 minutes to dedicate to this, but big stuff here. Continued support, invigorating growth as a priority. Fiscal consolidation is also mentioned in the report, and policies that should remain anchored within robust frameworks. And Brexit. Your take, Andrew?
Well, the first thing that crosses my mind is that this statement from Ms. Georgieva perhaps indicates again, as if we needed reminding, the political problems and the challenges which this type of set of circumstances present for hard right dogmatic conservatives, the type of which are in power in Westminster at the moment. What I mean is that we have a government comprised of fireplace salesmen and tatty farmers who are now going to try and argue the toss with the managing director of the IMF regarding public finance. It's that bad. And my point is, moreover, that especially for this government, the dogmatic position that they have taken for for 12 years now through austerity, where this determination of paying down debt and, in their mind, balancing the books and treating public finance as if it was a student's overdraft, it does not stand up. It is economically naive at best, and does not provide either a sense of reality or a sense of financial understanding and clarity which people require. And the statement today from the IMF underlines again the problem that the Conservative Party are now going to have to face. I think it was pretty clear that she was suggesting that both investment in welfare support, and we know that Rishi Sunak is very anxious to try and stop that as much as he can, but has had to step back from his more extreme attempts to stop the furlough scheme. The welfare support, but also investment. The notion that investment should be reduced. There's two things. Very much during the December general election in 2019, we heard repeated promises of investment from Boris Johnson and from the Conservative Party. Now, lots and lots of promises, but we know with Mr. Johnson and the Conservative Party, they make lots of promises, but they never pay out on those promises. They never invest. I'm old enough to remember how long it took for the M8 to be completed, so it actually connected two cities together, and the repeated Tory promises through the late 80s and early 90s that the M8 would be completed. They didn't complete it. So even in road,
that's right.
No, so even road building schemes, the Conservatives have let the country down, have let Scotland down, and continue to let people down. And so, whilst we had lots of promises of investment, I think Ms. Georgieva's statement today indicates that she doesn't believe the political promises that the Conservative Party made in December, and that's before the pandemic. The need to invest now in infrastructure, and invest now in infrastructure which will generate a return. Is even more pressing. At the simplest level, so much of our society is now conducted online. I have no idea what the numbers are, but I know pretty clearly how much the consumption of bandwidth in this household has jumped this year, as we're all with 4 Zoom calls going on at once in this house from time to time. So the need to provide, for example, internet infrastructure and national backbones which can provide the fastest possible and biggest possible data connections to everybody is an example where a need to invest, and to invest quickly in infrastructure, will provide a return and will help. But we're not seeing any of that coming. As ever, in Scotland, the Scottish Government has to step in with more money and more direction in order to pursue the rollout of faster broadband.
Adding to that, obviously, on a macroeconomic level, we have the big structural changes that will need to happen in the United Kingdom, or however that evolves, due to Brexit.
Yes, absolutely. you're absolutely right. So I suppose I'm perhaps doing the Conservative Party, perhaps misrepresenting them. Their headlong investment in concreting over Kent in order that you can park lorries on them as they wait to cross the Channel that's the investment that they're doing. So the
Well, it was
investment is in the
mentioned by
south.
a minister at Westminster, wasn't it, that it was going to provide some jobs. I wonder what special skill you need to have in order to apply for jobs at the lorry parks, but it remains to be
Well,
seen, I suppose.
I can in part answer that, I'm afraid to say. As we know, it's estimated that the local authorities in Kent will require to dispose of an extra 1.8 million litres of human waste a year as a result of the trucks that are standing idle waiting to cross the Channel. So all sorts of jobs are required, none of them very pleasant or very highly paid. So
Indeed.
the investment in concreting over sections of Kent by constructing what I think is correctly called the Farage Garage is all the investment that we're seeing. So that provides a real challenge for the Conservative government, because their shtick, if I can call it that, is to pretend that national finances are the same as a student's finances, to deny the fact that all of the quantitative easing that we've seen for the last 12 years is the government borrowing from itself. And so the notion that that in some way there is a hindrance, or also this notion, I heard it just yesterday, that in some way this would all have to be paid for, is just false. And I think if a combination of the financial pressures that people were feeling already, I'm aware of anecdotal evidence from towns in Lanarkshire, for example, where the people going to their banks seeking help are architects and restaurant owners and other small businesses, professional businesses, who would never have been in this difficulty before, but who now have no income. So we're in that situation already. And as you say, that is going to be multiplied by a factor of 100 by a hard or a thin Brexit, as economic activity, which is patchy at the moment, and I would argue is relatively shaky, as that economic activity is brought to a crashing halt by the thin Brexit or the hard Brexit, which is all that the Conservatives have to offer us.
Indeed, and on to some somber news now. At least 140 Europe-bound migrants drowned off the coast of Senegal when their boat caught fire and capsized, marking the deadliest shipwreck recorded this year. The UN Migration Agency reported today the boat carrying 200 people sank a few hours after leaving the fishing town of Mbo, 100 kilometers south of the capital Dakar, on Saturday, the International Organization for Migration said. Video shared on local media showed a rescue boat of local fishermen approaching a thick column of dark smoke in the open ocean as people swam frantically towards them. The Senegalese and Spanish navies and fishermen rescued some 60 people, but at least 140 people have drowned, IOM said in a statement. Migrant arrivals in the Canary Islands from West Africa have more than quadrupled so far this year to around 11,000, compared with the same period in 2019. The surge has happened as other more favoured routes through Libya or Algeria and across the Mediterranean Sea to southern Europe have become blocked off by tougher controls. The perilous sea passage to the Canary Islands was one a more popular route. Attempts became scarcer when Spain stepped up patrols in the mid-2000s. But with fewer options, migrants seeking an escape from poverty or conflict are again taking the longer 1,400-kilometre sea route to the Spanish islands off the Moroccan coast, often in rickety, overcrowded boats with unreliable engines. 14 boats carrying 663 migrants left Senegal for the islands in September, over a quarter of which experienced an incident or shipwreck, the IOM said. We don't have time to bring Andrew in on this, but obviously our thoughts are with the families of those lost at sea today. Our next piece of news, Polish abortion laws. There have been protests in Poland. Thousands of protesters in cities around the world have gathered over the past days in support of Poles who have taken to the streets after a court ruling further limited the country's restrictive abortion laws. In the week since the Constitutional Tribunal announced the ruling, those expressing solidarity with Polish protesters in Oslo, in London, Chicago, Glasgow, Brussels, and elsewhere have gathered in front of Polish embassies and in their city centres. After the ruling goes into effect, abortion will be banned in the case of fetal abnormality. It will be legal only in the case of rape, incest, or a threat to the woman's health. In Poland, tens of thousands have taken to the streets in cities and towns across the country since the ruling was announced on the 22nd of October. Demonstrators have blamed the nationalist government of Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki and the Roman Catholic Church, which has close ties to the ruling Law and Justice Party, for the court verdict. The international gatherings have varied in size, with tens coming together in front of the Polish embassy in Rome, hundreds in Oslo, and more than 1,000 in Stockholm on Wednesday. The protesters chanted "Revolution is a woman" and projected Polish women on strike in white and red lights onto the side of a building. Photos posted on Facebook showed. Protesters in Vienna on Tuesday carried posters reading "Poland won't die as long as we keep fighting together," according to photos published on Twitter. A mass protest in Warsaw is scheduled for Friday. Andrew, what a delicate subject. How are we regressing from the progress we made through the 60s and the 70s on these matters? And I will bring in the United States here with Wade and Roe now at peril with the Coney Barrett appointment. And obviously this in Poland. I was talking to a Polish friend yesterday, a doctoral researcher at Glasgow University, and she has a family here. So she has two British daughters, and she herself is very British, but remains very Polish. And she was saying to me, she said, look, you know what, if I regret one thing, obviously we're safe from this up here. That's great. But my God, I wish I was in Warsaw just now. I'd be out in the streets. What do you make of it?
Well, it's interesting you use the word regressive, Effie, because that's exactly the word I was going to use as well. I think the impositions and the difficulties which right-wing governments bring around the world, this is another serious example of those issues. The rights which people have obtained over the last few decades are being stripped back on dogmatic religious grounds, which is frankly unacceptable in the 21st century. The notion that women's bodies and women's rights can be restricted in this way bears no moral examination, let alone a legal examination. We know that the right-wing government in Poland has drifted to the right and has politicized the courts in a way that, as you rightly point out, is exactly the same in the United States, and that presents a problem. And that presents a practical problem for women who wish to retain control over their own bodies.
It's also to do with health, Andrew. Some women have health issues, and it's not simply to do with life and death. It could be a mental health related issue, which would not kill the woman, but it could eventually kill the woman by exacerbating an already existing mental health issue. So it's a very nuanced problem. And as you rightly pointed out, it's shocking how we're just standing by while this is happening after all the fights and all the struggles that we went through. It started in the 30s and it progressed until, we got Trump and the Poles and the Hungarians and others. Even in Britain, you have strong groups who believe that, women's bodies ought to be controlled in this way. And I do apologize. Obviously, I am taking a position here. Maybe I ought to be a bit more neutral. But I'll let you have the last couple of minutes just to neutralize the argument.
No, there's no difficulty with you taking a position which has moral authority and legal authority in most developed parts of the planet. So there's no problem with that at all. I think it's an indication there are potentially gender politics at play here. I do feel quite strongly that this restriction on women's rights is done to them by men, by and large, and so there's a significant issue there. And I think we've had the benefit of abortion rights in the mainland in the United Kingdom since the late 1960s. it crosses my mind that as a result of the restrictions which were only recently lifted in Ireland, that what happened was that many women who wished, for whatever reason, to control their own bodies and to seek a termination would travel to Glasgow or travel to Liverpool. Now, I think what we are probably likely going to see as an immediate reaction to this is that countries which border Poland are going to have to step up and offer to Polish citizens rights to offer to exercise their rights in those countries if those rights are being denied them in Poland at this moment. And that way, the women continuing to exercise their rights will demonstrate that attempts to remove those rights is wrong and should be stopped.
Yes, I could not agree with you more. And obviously, we would love to hear your thoughts to all our viewers. Now, on to our next item here. And SNP MP Peter Grant today hosted a virtual event to formally launch a bill which seeks to protect the NHS from future trade deals. The bill would prevent any future UK government from using the NHS as a bargaining chip in future trade deals, as well as forcing Westminster to have the consent of all devolved nations before signing international trade deals. Ahead of the bill's second reading in the Commons on the 6th of November, the virtual launch led by Mr. Grant included speeches from Ruth Bergen from the trade justice movements and Jocomspo Ngobo of We Own It. An NHS protection bill was a key pillar of the SNP 2019 general election campaign. Now, this is complicated, Andrew. Obviously, it's a fantastic idea, but we have the internal market bill. So to what extent do you think this could actually, this protest or this bill in its materiality could have a significance?
Well, I think there's maybe two things there, Effie. I think the as you say, this was a clear manifesto commitment from the SNP in December 2019, and so this is them seeking to deliver on that commitment by raising this matter. I think also that tabling this bill and bringing the matters within it to the attention of the population more generally is an important step, or is one important part of the ongoing battles to protect I'll be blunt about this, to protect the Scottish way of life. You mentioned the internal markets bill. We've seen the teaching unions and profession identify something that was obvious to most of us, which is that the different ways in which teachers are allowed to teach between England and the other devolved nations. In England, to teach in a school, as I understand it, you do not require a professional qualification.
No, in high school in England, you can just teach with much lower qualifications, whereas in Scotland, you must be qualified in the subject taught. So you must have a degree on this particular subject, which is not the requirement in England. So it's actually a position that, as you mentioned very well, a part of a quality of our lives which is being threatened just now.
Correct. So the internal market bill, in my view, is an assault on the way of life in Scotland. I was using teaching as an example. As you say, PGDE postgraduate qualifications are required to teach in Scotland. Thanks to Mr. Gove, no qualifications are required professionally to teach in England, which is seen by most people as being ridiculous. But that's just another example. Our legal institutions, our health service, our teaching, all of the fundamental component parts of Scottish life, which are protected under the Treaty of Union, will be attacked and undermined by the internal market bill. And so, in seeking to highlight the threats to the NHS and the Scottish NHS, because we know perfectly well that the Tory party have sold pretty much all of the family's silver so far, and so they are now scratching around in the back of the cupboard looking for whatever else it is that they can sell to their mates and make a quick buck. They've sold the post office under the internal markets bill. My prediction is that they will come for Scottish Water very quickly, and so the highlighting the need to protect Scottish NHS is very important, and I'm pleased that the SNP have delivered on a manifesto promise. They face an uphill battle in the context of a House of Commons where the government has a significant working majority, even on outrageous matters like whether or not to feed starving children, and so there's a big political hill to climb there. However, it indicates to me that the SNP is serious about it and is getting on with it. And I think we will see a succession of legislative attempts, as I say, to protect the fundamental parts of Scottish life, including the SNHS, our education system, our legal system, and more. Thinking for a second, the free trade agreement that's been signed with Japan, I understand, removes all of the geographical indication protections for all Scottish meat and for a number of other products from Scotland, so Scotch beef will not be a protected indicator in Japan anymore. And I know from Japanese friends how much they value Scottish produce, so we can see the extent to which the Brexiteers are going to damage our way of life and our economy.
But also, as you were saying about the protected origin, obviously, but just staying with the NHS for a second, it crossed my mind that this also covers data relating to the NHS, and as we know, under European Union law, data is a very, very restricted. The use of data and the limitations on retention of data by governments is protected under EU law. Now, we know the position of Mr. Cummings and others in regards to data because the United States has a much more lax approach. So the United States government can hold on to data and sell it on to private companies. Now, how much of this do you think might be linked to the idea of the NHS and them trying to, as you might think, add to the Brexit sort of treasure trove in terms of other things in addition to what is obvious, so pharmaceuticals, data, what have you?
Well, you make a very good point about modern society and modern politics, as well as our economies. As we know from platforms like Facebook and Twitter, that data is hugely valuable, valuable in a manner that's never been seen before, really, I think. And so I think it's no surprise that those who would wish to monetize and to dispose of organisations such as the SNHS see that one of the first things they're targeting is the data and the health information which the SNHS and health services generally produce and which they currently hold. And I think if one of the things that has been brought back to the surface during the pandemic is the importance and value of accurate and wide-ranging data regarding people. And so firstly, the threat that it is exported to the United States under some awful trade deal with the US is alarming, is very alarming. And also that the reason for exporting it largely will be in order that the data can be sold. And both of those things are unacceptable and are equally alarming.
And more on the NHS, changes to the way people access A&E will be tested in NHS Ayrshire and Arran ahead of a national redesign of urgent care to help people get the right care in the right place. This new approach will help people in NHS Scotland safe by ensuring A&E provides the fastest and most appropriate care for people when they really need it. While people in Ayrshire and Arran should continue to call 999 or go directly to A&E in emergencies, those with non-life-threatening conditions who would usually visit A&E should call NHS 24 day or night from the 3rd of November. People can also continue to call their GP practice for urgent care or access help online from nhsinform.scot. NHS 24 will assess people by telephone and will be able to refer them to the right care by the right healthcare professional and as close to home as possible. This will help keep people safe and avoid unnecessary travel to hospital. If a face-to-face consultation is necessary, the nearest A&E may arrange an appointment to avoid waiting in crowded areas wherever possible. This new approach will be tested throughout November to inform a national launch planned for December. This national change to urgent care will be supported by £20 million pounds worth of investment and a major public information campaign to enable people to get the right care in the right place. Very quickly, Andrew, we are all used to, from the cradle, go to A&E. How do you see this?
Well, I'm encouraged, Effie. I've seen signs, personally, I've seen signs over the last few years of the health service, of delivery of health service, especially emergency care, being redesigned, and redesigned by the people who, not redesigned by politicians or bureaucrats, but redesigned by the people who make the system work. Personally, I'm part of what's called the sandwich generation. I look after younger people and I look after older parents as well. And so I probably spend a greater than average amount of my time standing in hospitals at the moment. And so what I've seen is that there have been determined efforts to redesign, particularly emergency care. Certainly I'm in Edinburgh, so certainly in Edinburgh I've seen ongoing and very impressive redesigning of the way in which emergency care is delivered at the front line. And I think this move, partially perhaps driven by COVID, but also driven by this determination to deliver services better, is to be encouraged. And coming as it does at a time when, personally, again, I can see signs that the NHS is resuming its more normal way of operating, and that's not an intended pun, but it's the examples I'm thinking of are of non-life-threatening operations restarting. I think is important, and it's another reminder that the SNHS seeks to continue to innovate, and not to innovate to save money or to reduce the amount of demand, but to innovate in order to deliver services in the best possible way. These changes don't relate to life-threatening treatments. They relate to what's otherwise described, I think, as urgent care. And delivering urgent care in the best way possible, be it on the phone, be it with a video call, be it with an attendance at a GP or an attendance at A&E, that kind of organised and flexible system, I think, offers a demonstration of a way forward. And so I think it's to be encouraged.
Indeed, and the last item is health related too, and it's about face coverings. The Scottish Government has produced a face covering exemption card to support those who are unable to wear one to feel more confident and safe when accessing public spaces and using public services. Cabinet Secretary for Social Security and Older People, Shirley-Ann Somerville, said everyone who can do so is legally obliged to wear a face covering where it is mandated by law. But there are some people who cannot, due to health conditions, disabilities or other special circumstances where a face covering may cause difficulty or distress. Discrimination against people in this situation is unacceptable and will not be tolerated. We have developed this card in conjunction with a range of equality stakeholders as something which can clearly communicate to others if you are exempt from the regulations. The face covering exemption card is branded with the Healthier Scotland and NHS Scotland logos under the Facts for a Safer Scotland campaign. A physical card can be requested from Disability Equality Scotland to wear on a lanyard or hold in a wallet, while a digital card is also available to be displayed on a phone, tablet or other device. What has been your I suppose your gut reaction, I would say, Andrew, say in a supermarket over the last few months or in a public space where you have actually, at least I've seen a few people, very, very few, thankfully, but when you do see someone without a face covering, what happens and what you make of this new development?
Well, you know me too well, Effie. I was going to say that I can recall very clearly the first Saturday when the requirement to wear face coverings indoors came into force, and I was buying the messages for this household and for my parents, and I noticed people who weren't wearing masks. Now, my immediate gut reaction was negative. It was, why are these people not wearing a mask? But I managed to catch myself, thankfully, reminding myself that it's important in any time, but it's extra important just now to be kind and thoughtful. And I reminded myself that these people may very well have a good reason not to be wearing a mask, and it was unreasonable of me to be questioning them in that sense in my mind. So I calmed down and went about my business. Now, if that's my reaction, that'll have been the reaction from lots of people. So in terms of helping those who will be made to feel more confident or more relaxed about the all of the kind of glances and stares and everything else that they would be receiving, just in the nature, and just as it's human nature, I think this is an important step, and it's another indication of the way in which the public health response in Scotland is evolving and is improving.
I have to echo that. That was a brilliant conclusion to tonight's program. This is all we have time for tonight, but we will be back on Monday with another Scotland in 7. Meanwhile, thank you so much, Andrew Wilson, for being such a great interlocutor tonight. And also, if you can help us, please do, because these programs do cost some money, and we are completely dedicated to giving you an independent broadcaster for a better Scotland. However, we do depend on volunteers and we do depend on your donation. So please do visit our website if you are able to support us financially. Times are hard. If you can't, we understand, but do make sure you talk to your friends about us, talk to who you know, and just disseminate the news. Follow us on Twitter, follow us on Facebook, and if you can volunteer, do get in touch with us and let us know. This is all we have time for tonight. We will be back tomorrow with a special program. Sorry, the producer is that, have I missed something? Sorry. Oh, okay, sorry, again, me being a bit too green here. We will be back tomorrow, Friday, and then another edition of Scotland in 7 on Monday. Until then, goodbye from us. Okay, sorry. I think you'll have to, Andrew, do help me. I think there is a little bit of a tech issue. So maybe a little epilogue from Andrew.
That's okay. Effie, it's been great to be with you tonight. I think you've done a great job. You've clearly got a great career ahead of you in broadcasting.
Good God. That's such a big compliment. I'll take that. Thank you very much. Good night from both of us. Bye.